Hello and welcome to the Inside Intelligence event series, brought to you by the Johns Hopkins University MS in Intelligence Analysis program and the Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features former CIA analyst Aki Peritz on the last megaplot, Operation OVERT and the Unraveling of the CIA-ISI Counterterrorism Relationship. My name is Peter Huggins, and I'm the event producer. Please note today's program will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the MS in Intelligence Analysis playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function, and we'll answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion of the event. With that, I will turn the event over to the host of our program, Dr. Michael Ard.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome everyone to Inside Intelligence. Let me introduce our guest. Aki Peritz is a former CIA analyst and adjunct faculty member at American University. He is the author of Disruption: Inside the Largest Counterterrorism Investigation in History, and co-author of Find, Fix, Finish: Inside the Counterterrorism Campaigns that Killed bin Laden and Devastated Al-Qaeda. He comments on intelligence and national security issues for CNN, MSNBC, and NPR, and has published in The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Washington Post, Rolling Stone, and elsewhere. He is also a media star who is on the CBS show Hunted in 2017 as himself, using data analytics to hunt down contestants. As always, please post your questions in the chat or Q&A. We'll be happy to get to them in the second half of our webinar. With that, I'd like to turn over to our guest, Aki Peritz, who will talk to us about Operation OVERT.
All right, thanks, Mike. Thank you very much to the Johns Hopkins community for having me speak today. Let me just share my screen here. See what this. Make sure this works. All right. Without further ado, I grandly entitled this presentation, "The Last Megaplot: OVERT and the Unraveling of the ISI-CIA Relationship." So I wanted to actually sort of start off with a general question. Can you ever think of another captured terrorist with connections to a homeland plot where the organization, the Foreign Intelligence Service that actually caught him, refused to allow the US government to talk to them, ever? And then suddenly this person escaped from maximum security prison. I think you're going to find out that this question often does not get asked, and is often, this almost never happens throughout the last 20 years, at least as far as I can tell. All right, so I want to give you a very quick roadmap of where we want to go today. We're going to talk very quickly about Al-Qaeda's high watermark in its efforts to hit the United States after 9/11, and really how close these guys came to carrying out this devastating attack. And then finally, how this is actually the high watermark for relationships between the United States' CIA and Pakistan's ISI, and how after this happened, this is now 2006, 2007, things really sort of came apart at the seams between the organizations. Here's my shameless plug. People loved it, I think. Foreign Affairs called it gripping. The most important blurb here is really about my wife at the bottom. She said it's finally done, because it took me years and years to write this thing. All right, so since I teach at American University and I also work at University of Maryland, I wanted to very quickly talk about sources. When you read books like this, you always kind of wonder, like, how does he know all this stuff? Is he making it up? And if you read other books, you'll find that if you ask critical questions, and I hope those of you who are interested in intelligence analysis start asking when you read a book, especially a nonfiction book, how does the author actually know this? How does the author really know what was going on in somebody's head who's now dead? And the answer is sometimes authors make it up. So I wanted to be perfectly transparent about how I got this information. One is I went through a ton of court documents, mostly in the British system, also in the European systems. I also I was able to receive scores and scores of police and MI5 internal surveillance notes through a variety of sources. And if you're actually interested about this, how MI5 and undercover police work, I talk about it at great length in the book. This almost never happens. I was able to get almost the entire email traffic to and from Pakistan, and in this case to London. This is oftentimes collected by NSA and by America's cousins, SIGINT cousins in Britain, GCHQ. But for a variety of reasons, which I'm happy to talk about later on, I was able to get this top secret information. Tons of stuff. If you ever write a book, you should FOIA everything. The Brits actually have a very good FOIA system as well, but I also talked to the FBI, DOJ, DHS, a whole score of British organizations out there, and they gave me some really interesting insight into what was happening, and I hope to show it. I also did a ton of interviews, White House, CIA, MI6, MI5, Treasury, lots and lots of cops. Cops love to talk about the good old days, and so I talked to those folks. I talked to a number of other folks. Believe it or not, I actually found the terrorist ringleader's ex-wife, and she's on Facebook. You can find anybody online nowadays. And so I had a nice conversation with her. Okay, so let's go back to 2005. And I know that for those of you who are students, maybe you don't quite remember those hoary days in those days. But anyways, the Brits essentially stopped multiple Al-Qaeda attacks following 9/11 on British soil. But they actually missed the biggest one, which happened on July 7th, 2005, and it was actually the worst attack in London since World War II. The guys who did it were British-born and raised. Some of them attended camps in Pakistan. They basically took rucksacks, filled them full of explosives, and brought them onto the London Underground, the subway, and also onto a bus at rush hour. The sad part was the Brits and the Americans had no idea they were coming. And I go into this in detail in the book, but essentially they thought that these guys were not under anybody's radar. Even though we had hundreds, if not thousands of people looking at terrorist activities here in the United States, the Brits also are monitoring hundreds and hundreds of people, but they had no idea these guys were up to no good. And the scary part was, after the most devastating attack since World War II, there was another cell that carried out almost the exact same attack. And they tried to hit the Underground and London transport. And there was no intelligence on those guys either. So here are some photos. Here are some of the attackers. They made no effort to actually hide their faces. There's actually a point where they're driving into London and they have to stop for gas, and they go to the gas station, and the main bomber, he pays the money, he pays in cash, and he's arguing over the change. And then he looks directly into the camera and he smiles, because he probably knew that this was going to become evidence as soon as he was done with his deed. Here's a better shot. As you can see, this is in the Underground itself. These guys are carrying these huge rucksacks, and they detonated in the morning, during the morning rush hour. Okay, so who carried it out? A group of people, but the mastermind was this fellow named Rasheed Rauf. He was a British-born. He was actually born in Pakistan as a baby, and then as a baby came to Birmingham. He actually flees in April 2002 because his uncle gets murdered, which is a totally different, weird, crazy story. But he suddenly leaves, and he's the main suspect in this potential honor killing. He actually wanted to attack. He actually wanted to come back to the UK in 2005 and carry out this attack, but he actually declined. He decided not to, because he was actually still the prime suspect in his uncle's murder from 3 years beforehand. And he decided, this is not a good idea. So if he went back and he got caught by the cops for whatever reason, he could unravel he might be able to unravel the entire attack, and he didn't want to do that. So he stayed put. But the thing is that after 7/7, which again killed 52 people, including 4 bombers, British society kind of went back to work. The Underground was up and running a couple days afterwards. The FTSE actually, the stock market actually went up This attack occurred on a Thursday. It was opened by Friday, and it didn't take any losses. There were no major cancellations of airplanes, major cancellations of hotels. They realized there wasn't really any like long-term effect on this global metropolis, and so they really wanted to dream. They really wanted to dream bigger. So one thing really led to another. So these guys didn't destroy anything. So the 7-7 guys were killed, but the 721 folks were not. And so they left all their computers, their emails, their stuff in their pockets. There was one person who was involved in a peripheral way. His name is Abdullah Ahmed Ali, sometimes known as AAA, and I'll just call him Ali here. He was actually buddies in his friend's cell phone of one of the ringleaders, and so the authorities just watched him. They just sat on it and watched his comments for months. He also started going back and forth to Pakistan, and he was buying really strange things like dozens of batteries. And so obviously, you know that in the UK, there's no battery shortage. So why is this fellow showing up in the UK? And as people were going through his luggage, he had all these batteries. It was very strange. Nobody really knew why. And so basically, this is what the batteries look like. So if you've been paying attention to this note, it's like, why were the authorities going through his luggage in the first place? And the answer is because he was a suspect. What was he suspected? What was he a suspect of? And the answer is they didn't know, but they were going through his stuff anyways. The point is that this actually jump-started a humongous investigation. It's called OVERT, or Operation OVERT. And let me tell you something really fast, is that I was actually talking to a reporter who had just talked to the current head of MI5. This is Britain's domestic intelligence service / counterterrorism lead. And and the current director general was actually saying that OVERT was probably the shining success of the service in the last 20 years. And so they're very proud of it, even though they don't really talk about it very much. I wanted to talk very quickly also about what it takes to actually watch people. People don't realize this. If you watch movies and TV, you know, you have guys in the van, they're listening, and the guys they're listening to the thing, and it's incredibly manpower intensive. So here in OVERT, the investigation expanded to 24 different people, and this required 24-hour surveillance over the course of many weeks. And I just put some math here, and I know that when you do a presentation, you never want to do math because people hate doing math, which I understand. So I kind of laid it out here. So if you have one person and they require an 8-man team, watching them for 24 hours, that's 24 to 30 surveillance officers, different surveillance officers, because these people need to eat, they need to sleep, they need to stay in the shadows. Once one of these guys is seen, you can blow the entire op. And so these guys are incredibly professional, very well-trained individuals, but you need a lot of them. So basically you have to rotate through over 700 people for 24 different suspects. There are also part-time people involved. The point is that if you think of what Britain is, Britain's it's a big society, but they only have so many surveillance officers out there. And so they actually had to pull people out of Northern Ireland, looking at these splinter cells, these splinter IRA cells. They had to pull people from the military. Remember, this is now 2006. So there's a hot war going on in Afghanistan, Iraq, elsewhere. They had to pull everybody. I talked to one fella who's the head of surveillance for the London Metropolitan Police, and he said if the Boy Scouts had a surveillance unit, they pull him too. Long story short, Cell had put together enough chemicals to destroy several planes. Where, when, don't know when, but they had enough stuff to do something really bad. And more ominously, Al-Qaeda, this is through Rasheed Rauf from a few slides beforehand, were able to smuggle the liquid explosives onto a plane for a test run somewhere in the world. Where that is, nobody knows. Not even CIA or ISI or MI6 really know, because they only talk about it. They only talked about it years after the fact. We took down, on the 9th of August, 2006, there was this huge raid in Pakistan to take down Rasheed Rauf. He forgot to turn off his cell phone, which is a rookie move if you're being tracked by premier intelligence agencies. But by taking this one fella down in Pakistan, who were talking on a daily basis, on an hourly basis almost, with folks in London, it forced the Brits to arrest over 20 people before they actually knew what was going on, and they destroyed all the evidence. Over the next several years, the wheels of justice turned slowly, and so most of these guys were convicted, but not all of them. In fact, the fella who's in the upper right-hand corner, he actually beat the entire rap. And this is really the reason why we have this 3-1-1 rule on planes. You can only have 3 ounces of liquids per liquid in a bag, even though people don't really pay attention to that very much anymore. But that rule still exists if you fly. What's scary is I talked to the number 2 person at CIA during my interviews, and he said that had they just tried to pull it off in 2005 or 2004, they would have just gotten away with it because we weren't watching it. We didn't know who these guys were. We weren't, and we didn't know what the capabilities of Al Qaeda really were to do something this simple but elegant, and that's pretty scary. But now we've caught this super bad guy. Pakistan refused to let us talk to him. Why? What made him so special? And this is a picture of the jail he was caught in. And honestly, I didn't know, and the United States didn't really know. And it was because Rasheed Rauf told his Pakistani captors that he was, quote, trained in Kashmir. He was also the brother-in-law for a prominent fella named Masood Azhar, who Pakistan has basically been working with since the mid-90s, essentially. And so he was very well connected in Pakistan. And had they admitted that he'd been trained potentially by the Pakistani spy service, that he was connected by family and by blood to a senior person who worked with the Pakistani spy service, this would be extremely embarrassing for Pakistan, of course. And so basically, Pakistan stonewalled them. Throughout the interviews, I talked to numerous CIA officials who were very well connected at the time, and I asked them, had Pakistan ever denied access to anybody else since 9/11? And they couldn't think of anybody. So Rasheed Rauf might be the only person who Pakistan just refused to let us talk to. Don't take my word for it. Let's see what Director Mueller said. So this is Director Mueller, FBI Director Mueller. He said he calls a person in Pakistan, his counterpart in Pakistan. He says, like, we really want to have FBI access to Rasheed Rauf. And what you see on the right-hand side is the FBI readout of this piece that I got declassified. FBI really wants to talk to him. They sent 2 special agents, 2 interrogators to talk to him in jail. In response, the person says, we would take the director's request under consideration. So if you've ever had that told to you that I'm going to take your request under consideration, that's of course the brush off. And then Rasheed Rauf escapes custody on 15 December 2007 and disappears. That's a story for another time. If you want to learn more about what happened to him, check out the book. But that's a crazy story that even CIA folks. In fact, when I talked to General Hayden, General Michael Hayden, who was the head of the CIA at the time, he was actually in a meeting when he found out that this guy had disappeared, and he goes, "That's what they do in Pakistan." So I want to talk very quickly about how the relationship between the Americans and the Pakistanis kind of breaks up right here. This is really the last time that the ISI and the CIA really worked together to stop an Al-Qaeda plot. There were other minor ones, but by the next year, CIA tried to hit 20 different targets in Pakistan and missed every single time, which has never been done, which seems like that sounds pretty bad. So the question at CIA headquarters was, were these guys being warned? Surely we could have gotten somebody at some point during 2007. And this is when those unilateral drone operations really ramped up inside of Pakistan. Obviously, this is before the Bin Laden operation. And I wanted to show you this. This is from New America. You can actually see how these are UAV strikes in Pakistan itself. So you can see from 2004, 2007, there are a dozen, 8, something like that. And then in 2008, when they decide we're just going to do unilateral attacks, this is when you see the curve goes way up. All right, and also, this wasn't actually not even part of the book, but everybody that I talked to in the government said you have to talk about this. And I said, okay, so Mumbai attack occurs in 2008. This was done by ISI supported Kashmir proxy. So which one was worse? Was that ISI authorized it, which means that why should Washington trust it? These are totally civilian targets. And let's say if ISI had not authorized it, did that mean command and control had totally broken down? So ISI was not even in control of their proxies working in Pakistan itself. The Director General of the ISI came to DC and he told the Pakistani ambassador at the time named Hussein Haqqani, he's like, quote, "These were our guys, but not our operation." And then he, on the same visit, he actually visited headquarters, CIA headquarters. And he says, like, I don't know what you're talking about. These guys, I have no idea. These guys, terrorists, we have no control. At the time, CIA assessed that ISI knew pretty well what was going on because these guys lived openly. And they had these long-term relationships with the intel services. In fact, one of the group's leaders would give the Eid, he would give major speeches in Lahore, which is one of the biggest cities in Pakistan, in the biggest stadium called Gaddafi Stadium in Lahore every year, and it'd be jam-packed. Everybody knew where he was. So Director Hayden actually told the ISI chief to his face, "That's all BS." Now he used slightly saltier language, but this is going on YouTube, so I want to keep it clean. But suffice to say that this is where it all kind of fell apart. It's right here. All right, so maybe you're thinking this is ancient history. Who cares? It's happened a long time ago. What about today? I want to give you a kind of a good news, bad news thing to leave you with. I wanted to talk about, usually these things you start off with bad news, so let's start with bad news. Our tech, you go through 2022, your tech cannot stop these bombs. These were bombs. I'll show you. Imagine this is a liquid. It popped out the bottom of the bottle. They took out all the liquid, put in the liquid explosives, and this doesn't have a top. But if they had a top, you'd look at the top and say, well, it looks completely sealed. It should be fine. We can bring it through. We don't know how to stop these bombs. You can also buy all these chemical precursors that this terrorist organization purchased, and you can make bombs at home. And you can do it too. And people do it too. And if you know what you're looking for, and you know how to boil all these chemical precursors down, you can do it. Throughout the book, I actually found it, since 2006, 2007, we send in teams, or undercover teams, to try to test airport security. And they have a 90% success rate. And in fact, one GAO, or what maybe it was DHS effort, they had a bag and they put a device in there with wires, and it looked like dynamite wires, and then they put a sign on it that says, "This is a bomb." And they put it in their bag and they sent it through security, and it got through. So pretty scary stuff. This happened to me personally. I was writing this book, obviously, about this massive attack, or massive thwarted attack. But if you say, well, listen, I got a kid here, or I have this water, and you go through a smaller airport, they'll just let you through because you're a nice looking person. And that's pretty scary. All right. Okay, so before he's like, I'm never taking a plane ever again because these bad guys are blowing things up all the time. Let me give you some good news. And I want to leave you on a high note. Air travel is totally the safest way to travel in the world. You probably have a better chance of getting killed on the way to the airport than you do actually on the flight. It's actually safer than buses, believe it or not. I looked this up for this presentation. It's safer than taking the trains. It's different than boats and cars. Definitely safer than motorcycles. It is 100% the most safe way to travel is through the air. And the last major airplane plot was in 2017, which I go into in the book a little bit, but nothing's really happened. I mean, there have been little small incidents here and there, but the last effort to blow up a plane in the world was essentially in 2017, passenger plane, that is. And they almost got away with it, by the way, but didn't happen. We actually have a very aggressive security system to fight Islamist terrorism. Not all terrorism, but definitely Islamist terrorism. And the CIA and the FBI and DHS and our foreign partners work pretty well. We had a lot of problems, and there still are gaps in our armor, but we've done a very good job over the last 20 years to sort of fix all that stuff. And so we've been pretty good and pretty successful. Not totally successful, but relatively successful. And then finally, honestly, it's just easier to pull off a single person attack. Person with a gun, person with a car, two guys with a car. Think about the Boston bombers. Those are just two brothers with pressure cooker bombs. Had they been the Boston shooters instead of the Boston bombers, they probably would have killed more than 3 people. It's easier to just take a truck and drive into a crowded area and do something bad that way. You'll just have a higher body count. We all know that there is a mass shooting in America every 3 or 4 days, according to the Washington Post, and that is defined as more than 4 casualties. So these onesies and twosies are actually much easier to pull off than a huge conspiracy, which the OVERT effort really was. But an OVERT attack would kill thousands of people, and that would be quite devastating to our aviation system, to our sense of security, and to our country as well. So anyway, so that's it. That's a kind of a whirlwind walk through the book, and a couple of things to think about. I'd love to hear your questions. There are tons of things that I didn't talk about in this presentation that I would love to talk about. It's all in the book, but I'm happy to talk about anything you guys want to hear about. And let me turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Aki. Thanks for that great presentation. One thing about the story, which I thought was really interesting, was that in fact, ISI offered to pick Ralph up for us. And we said, yes, we'd like you to do that. And they did it.
They did.
And that was back when, they were very sensitive about what they perceived as our criticism of their cooperation, right? Mm. And maybe speak a little more to this, because it has a lot to do with the plot of your book.
Sure. So it just so happened that at the time that all this is happening was that General Hayden and his chief of staff and the director of operations, Jose Rodriguez, just happened to be in Pakistan anyways. They were doing a whirlwind trip through the war zone, and they were stopping in, they stopped in Iraq, and then they were in Pakistan, and then General Hayden and part of his entourage went onto Afghanistan at the time. This is when he first became director. And so he's just going around talking to people and, as director and so forth. In this meeting, the head of the ISI, General Kayani, and a number of other folks were there and said, like, listen, we're fighting terrorism. You Americans are always criticizing us about fighting. You guys are always telling us you're not fighting terrorism, but we're losing guys left and right, in the tribal areas, in the cities. We're the ones kicking down doors and shooting people and arresting people, and we're the ones taking the risk. And you Americans are always saying that we're always messing up, and we're in bed with Al Qaeda and all these other terrorist groups. So if we take down this guy, are you with us? And Jose Rodriguez returned, and he says something effective. Of course we're with you. And it just so happens that Rasheed Rauf, they were monitoring his telephones, and he just forgot to turn it off. And they knew he was coming, and they could tell based on how fast the pings were pinging off of the cell towers, how fast he was going. So he's probably in a bus. And so they just set up a checkpoint, and they said, and there's a great scene in the book where Jose Rodriguez is going to dinner, and he's sitting with the number one guy in the agency in country, and a brigadier in the ISI and the driver, and the brigadier and the number one guy in Pakistan both get a phone call at the same time from their guys at the checkpoint, and they say, "Hey, we know that Rasheed Rauf is about to get here in about 5-6 minutes. We can see the bus in the distance. What should we do? Go or no go?" And they all have to make a decision. And so in a split second, they said, "Take him down."
Right.
And so that's what happened. And so I don't want to throw too much shade at the Pakistanis, because they're the ones who actually have to go out and do all this like tough, violent stuff. And they take real risks. And real officers do get hurt and get killed. But there's also another part of the ISI that have other things that they like to sort of keep on the boil.
Right. No, thanks for that. I mean, that of course had a lot to do with, it set wheels in motion on our plotters back in England, and of course, once Rauf was captured. But let's talk a little bit more about that, because one thing I found particularly interesting was, Ali, let's AAA or Ali, right? I mean, and this was, as you recall, sort of an era maybe of the high water mark of Al-Qaeda or what have you. But why would they have considered him a promising candidate to really be their main man in carrying out something of so complicated an attack like this?
Well, it was really interesting because he shows up in 2002 in Pakistan, not knowing really anybody, but he was connected back in Birmingham. And it's really complicated how all this works. Mm-hmm. But essentially, he shows up in Pakistan. He connects very quickly with the right people. Remember, he's a British citizen, and so, but he speaks all the languages. He understands Pakistani society, but he also has. He graduates from high school. He had some university education, and so he suddenly he kind of jumps in sort of the social milieu into like a pretty high space, and his family already had connections through Kashmir to a number of jihadi groups. Especially with this fellow named Masood Azhar. And so long story short, he makes his way to the area where Masood Azhar lives and ingratiates himself with a family. He eventually becomes his brother-in-law because he marries a woman who was Masood Azhar's sister. And so now they are bound by kith and kin and blood. And he very successfully pulls off the 7/7 attacks in Britain, and unsuccessfully pulls off the 7/21. Or actually, he winds up his soldiers and he sends them on. And he at that point in 2005, he already had connections to the camps in Afghanistan, camps in Pakistan, camps the Al-Qaeda guys who trusted him to pull off various activities. He was a trusted agent, so to speak, and he was. Another thing was, since he was this guy who could navigate seamlessly between two cultures, he was the guy who was the spotter for individuals from Britain who were looking to fight in Afghanistan against the Americans, against the British. He was the guy who would find people, these guys who show up onesies and twosies in Pakistan, and he would quickly turn them around to bring them to send them back to Britain. And so there were other individuals who tried to pull off attacks, and some of them got cold feet. And so they were trained in Pakistan, went back to Britain, and then said, I don't want to have anything to do with this. Mm-hmm. And we don't actually know what happened to those guys. They're still out there, but they never pulled anything off. And nothing they did actually was illegal. It was not even illegal in Britain to go and attend a training camp in Pakistan until 2005. Mm-hmm. So if he did that before 2005, there's nothing he did. There's nothing wrong. Mm-hmm. So,
and the other part of the story is, of course, that Ali was pretty much being followed almost from the beginning. right? I mean, he's got a tail on him very early on.
Mhm.
And I thought that it was very interesting how much local police, how the big role they played in this, and doing so much of the groundwork and following the main conspirators.
Absolutely. I mean, you got to remember that MI5 has, at the time, 3,000, people, employees, maybe more. But a major metropolitan law enforcement system has tens of thousands of employees who are trained. I mean, the unsung story about all these conspiracies is that the police, the actual physical beat cops, do most of the work. And yet it's the higher level organizations, the MI5s, the MI6s, the CIA, et cetera, who get all the glory. And they were just cops. I mean, MI5 has no arrest capabilities in the British system. And so it would always have to be a police officer who physically arrested somebody. And there's a great scene at the end when they're about to roll up everybody. The main conspirator, Ali, and the main quartermaster, who was collecting all these precursors over the last several months, they're in a car park in East London, and they're just chit-chatting outside their cars. And then they get this, the surveillance team gets the call, and they said, like, take those guys out. We're wrapping everybody up tonight. And the surveillance team says, we don't have any weapons.
Mm.
This is Britain. Cops don't have guns.
Right.
Which is all so strange. And so think about it. You have to take down 2 major Al-Qaeda operatives with no guns. And that's what they had to do. And so I think they had like some handcuffs, and they just basically bum rushed them. Bum rushed these 2 guys. They had no idea whether they had, they had guns, or they had a knife, or the bomb was in the car, or whatever. They just had to just do it. And these guys were, the surveillance guys were so professional, men and women. They were so professional in their efforts, and they were so effective that the Al-Qaeda operatives had no idea they were out there, even though it was kind of a darkened car park in the middle of, in Britain. So they gave up without a fight. But who knows? Can you imagine here in the United States, these 2 Al-Qaeda guys are walking down the streets, and the cops who have to stop them have no guns? I mean, it just boggles the American mind.
Well, yeah, we'd go after them with like 80 SWAT teams.
Yeah.
But
there
anyway,
was an armed response that showed up maybe.
But yeah, we wouldn't even the guys with the guns wouldn't be trusted. We'd have anyway. But okay, so I think this is a good point to introduce this, because of course that all happened after Ralph was picked up.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, and at that point, naturally, they were going to have to, as soon as these conspirators got wind of that, it would have broken up. So, and this gets back to the bigger point. A lot of the I think the story is here. They're slowly, painstakingly, the UK authorities are putting together a criminal case against a big conspiracy. And they backfill U.S. and their U.S. Counterparts. And what does the U.S. want to do?
Well, this is one of the interesting things, and I got a lot of play actually in the British press, is that America saw this as a war, right? These are implacable enemies who are going to destroy multiple airplanes over the Atlantic, American carriers, mostly American, United. I think Air Canada was part of it as well. And we have to shut down this thing no matter what. And this came down from President Bush, and I talked to Fran Townsend, who was their assistant on counterterrorism, and Juan Zarate, and several members in the CIA and DHS, et cetera. They said, take these guys down as quickly as possible. And the British kept saying, we understand your concern, but we need to collect information. These are all British citizens in Britain who have civil liberties, and we need to create an effective, airtight case against these criminals. They consider them criminals. And so you had this sort of a war footing context running into a criminal context. And it's not like it's not like in other countries where Americans could be a lot more aggressive in picking up these guys. The United States had to rely upon the British to actually pull it off. It's quite interesting because talking to several cops, and these were people who were police officers in the 80s and 90s as well, when there was a lot of IRA attacks in London and elsewhere in the UK, is that they would say, we used to fight the IRA just as lethal and as dangerous in Britain, in London, with a fifth of the resources that we were throwing at this thing, and we would have to do that. So for example, if you ever go to London today, there's this huge, beautiful building called the Gherkin. It's this modern building that looks kind of like a pickle. The reason why that exists is because what was there beforehand was bombed by the IRA, and it basically destroyed the major building that was there. And so they had to collapse the building, take it away, and then sold it to the firm that built the Gherkin. And real people died in these attacks. And Lord Mountbatten was killed by the IRA, and there were attacks in the undergrounds for 130 years beforehand, all IRA and Irish attacks. And so the British had a much more sort of law enforcement criminal mindset to take down this group, which I think that is understandable. But I think it's understandable about how the Americans perceive this threat as well.
Because this would have been flights to the United States.
Flights to the United States, American citizens on these United States, American flights. And by the way, there were lots of people who could have been on that flight. So for example, the National Security Advisor at the time, Stephen Hadley, his daughter was in Britain. And remember, this is in August of 2006. So this is August, people are on vacation. His wife could have been on it, Dana Perino, who was the deputy press secretary at the White House. She and her husband were in Britain as well, I think on vacation. She was never told about this conspiracy. The day that they shut down, by the way, they also shut down all the corridors when all this stuff went down. You know who got stuck in all this was Senator Chuck Schumer and his family. They were stuck in like one of these planes, and so there was one of these fellows who were just like wandering around Heathrow Airport looking for his luggage, just like everybody else. Just even though he's a major political figure here in the United States, he was just a guy who wasn't briefed on this at all, and he was just stuck there with his family. So this was a very, very close hold kind of operation. And what the Brits and the Americans, to a lesser extent, they were so concerned that this thing would leak because so many people knew about it. Eventually, somebody was going to talk, whether it was from the American side or from the British side. Somebody would just talk about it, or one of these guys would go to the press, and then it was off.
Let me get to some of the questions now. Thanks everybody for your good questions in the Q&A in the chat. Bob asks, can you discuss any specific analytic challenges that the US and the UK faced around this time about this? I mean, was this really a collection story?
It was a collection story, but it was also an analytic problem. So we knew, and I talked to various analysts at the agency at the time, senior analysts who were handling this at the time, who shall remain nameless. And they said that they would get these bits and pieces of scraps of information coming from Pakistan, from the Brits, from our own collection, and they would struggle to make sense of it all. And I said, why? And it turns out it's because the terrorists themselves didn't know what they wanted to do at the time. They were trying to kind of figure it out. They were trying to figure it out themselves. And so when the adversary doesn't know what you want to do, how on earth are the intelligence services, the analysts who are working very hard to figure this out, what are they supposed to know? Because they don't know what their counterparties are not up to. And so as information became clear and the conspiracy became clear, then you can write high level pieces of analysis. And I detail this in the book, is that it turns out that Tony Blair and George Bush were talking to each other several times a day. And so for those of you know, that the PDB comes out once a day, and it comes out early in the morning to brief to the president and senior policymakers. But by the time the analysts wrote the PDB on this OVERT every night, it was already overcome by events. It was stale because Tony Blair and Bush had been talking to each other constantly, and
they knew it.
And so what actually happened was Fran Townsend, who was the assistant on Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, and I can tell his name, Morgan Muir, who was the president's briefer at the time. By the way, everything I'm saying was all cleared by the CIA. So I, as a former CIA employee, I had to sign something saying that I would not give away sources and methods, secrets, etc. And everything I'm telling you has been cleared. So please don't be afraid of that. I'm going to give you real like things that are going to undermine the U.S. government. But essentially, Morgan and Fran had an understanding that they would constantly ping other folks within the U.S. government and the analysts, and they would just get their information orally, and then they would constantly bring this up to the president. And so by the time the president talked about it with Tony Blair, with other senior policymakers, they already knew about it. And so the PDB itself became kind of almost an artifact, which was a placeholder for all this information, but the president already knew it. And so it was a really interesting analytic conundrum, which I don't know that really happens all that often, where the president, the customer already knows everything that's already in the PDB before the PDB is even written, because he just knows it he knows it faster. And so that was an interesting analytic problem. The Brits obviously were collecting tons of information, but the Americans kept saying, well, have you considered this? Have you done this? Fran Townsend was, she's obviously a major person in the book. She kept asking, have you considered this? Do these people, what kind of relationships do the known cell members have to people with, they're called SIDA, they're secure identification for airports. You know, the thing. If you have one of these cards, you can just get into an airport without going through security. What kind of relationships do they have? Do they work together? Do they go to the same mosques or the same bar, the gyms? Are they cousins? How does it work? And so, and the British just didn't have that information. They simply didn't have it. And so the United States kept pushing and leaning forward very, very hard on the Brits to say, take these guys down. And they kept asking difficult questions, understandable, but difficult questions, but the British could not answer, even though they were throwing tons of resources at this issue.
Right. And Bush was urging it too, right?
And Bush was urging it too.
Yeah,
He said,
yeah. I mean, so there was this going on, and you read it, you think with some sympathy that, look, this thing could get compromised, right?
It totally could get compromised. I mean, Bush was.
So I mean, you could you got your suspects here all expecting many, as you detail, they're all expecting that they're being watched in some way.
Yeah. Well, here's something crazy: is that the Brits wanted to lean so far, and I heard this almost from the firsthand, is that they wanted to actually. Here's how. And think about, like, you're an American policymaker. You're listening to this. They say, we're going to let these guys build their bombs, drive to Heathrow Airport, get onto the planes, and then they're sitting there, putting on their seatbelts or whatever. And then the pilot's going to come out and they're going to say, we've got a mechanical failure. Can you please deplane so we can figure out this thing? And so everybody gets out, and then they get arrested in the terminal. And so you say, like, and the Brits, that was an actual idea by the British government. And the Americans are like, you got to be kidding me. You're going to put terrorists onto planes. You're going to allow them to have working bombs, bring them into planes with the other 240 people on the plane, and then deplane and hope they don't blow themselves up, and just hope they don't blow themselves up. And if one goes, the other guy, they're all in the same terminal. They're all, if you hear an explosion and you're carrying a bomb too, you're going to pull the plunger as well. And so that was, shall we say, shot down very quickly. But that's how far close to the edge the Brits were considering playing.
So they could get everything. They could catch them red-handed.
They could catch them red-handed, but they have working bombs. All they had to do is just pull the two things together, and
that was way too risky. Okay, so some more
insane idea.
Yeah. Some more questions. And here's one. This might resonate with you, from Barbara. what is your bottom line on the ISI's priorities and motives?
Well, that's a great question. That is one that I struggled with writing this book in a very, very big way. Because it was obvious that the parts of the ISI were willing to work with the Americans in a big way because they understood the threat, not just to the Americans, but also to the Pakistani state of these jihadi organizations. They understood, and Steve Kappas and General Hayden and others, Larry Pfeiffer, they all said, there's one Brigadier Khan who was the head of C Wing. He understood the threat and the challenge, not just to global security, but to actually the state itself. And they worked very, very well together, and they took down a lot of bad guys, especially in the early years of following 9/11. However, and I was talking to Mike about this beforehand, it's really strange that, we talk about coincidences. It's really strange that a lot of bad guys got away for a long time, for so many years. And so for example, Mike and I were talking about this during the Battle of Tora Bora. So remember that Al Qaeda is coming over the mountains, and they're being hammered by special forces and the Air Force and CIA small groups. And Bin Laden gives this farewell speech. I'm sorry, I failed you. We're all going to die. And then suddenly, within 24 hours, there's an attack on the Indian Parliament by ISI proxies. Delhi is very far away, so they had to plan it for a while, pulling the Pakistani military. It was a pincer move, pulling the Pakistani regular military from the mountainous areas onto the Indian border. And that's among other reasons why a lot of these groups, all these bad guys, kind of like disappeared into Pakistan proper, being assisted by ISI-backed Kashmiri groups who knew all the mountain passes, who had all the relationships, who knew where the guest houses were, and they just kind of filtered all these guys out throughout Pakistan. Is that a coincidence? I don't think it's a coincidence, but there's nothing I can really do to prove this. Now, this is not my theory. This is Bob Grenier's theory, who was the chief in Islamabad on 9/11. It's also Wendy Sherman's theory, who was the ambassador to Pakistan, who's now, I think, Deputy Secretary of State. They both think, and they both went on the record saying this in another book, saying that there's something really not kosher about this. And there are all these other points where ISI-backed groups assisted Al Qaeda in their time of need, in their greatest time of peril. And so it only leads me to believe that there are individuals in the ISI. The ISI is not a monolithic organization. That there are groups who want to protect the Pakistani state, and yet there are other groups, for their own ideological reasons, are protecting these organizations, these jihadi organizations, because they feel that they can get some other benefit from them. So it's an incredibly difficult. I wish I could give you a bottom line, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of conspiracies here, but there's a lot of relationships that we've never really uncovered. Let me give you another example. When there was an attack on something called the Red Mosque in Islamabad, where there were students were protesting. They would go out into Islamabad and harass people all the time, and they would call for the death of Musharraf, was the head of the president, and they were actively supporting the Taliban. Finally, they attacked some Chinese nationals in Islamabad, and the Chinese and the Pakistanis are very close. The Chinese government said, you can't do that. And so the Pakistanis encircled it. There's a firefight, 100 people start getting, they had to attack this thing. The person that they called in was Rasheed Rauf's brother-in-law, not Masood Azhar, but Masood Azhar's brother, to negotiate a truce and a surrender in the Red Mosque situation. And so the Pakistani state definitely sees these jihadi organizations, these very, very violent organizations, and their leadership as resources to achieve their their goals. And so therefore I can't say that they're in bed. They are in bed, but they also use each other. So I'm sorry, this has been a this is as clear as mud, and I think it's going to continue to be so.
Thanks. I mean, this segues into another question, but by the way, Sheila, Ralph actually was not prosecuted. Ralph is believed to have been killed in a drone strike a year or so after his escape. But anyway, let me just add that to in the chat. But your question is essentially, now that we're out of Afghanistan, what is our collection on these groups going to be like? Are we able to monitor them, and perhaps who can we turn to for help?
That's quite difficult. I mean, obviously we're not in Afghanistan anymore, and so we lost a lot of our ability to much more aggressively monitor these folks. As you can probably guess, the United States' relationship with Pakistan is not super great right now, and so America's ability to monitor, surveil, and actually take action against Pakistan or Afghanistan related terror groups has been greatly neutered. And that's one of the things, and Mike and I were talking about this beforehand, was imagine 9/11 happens. Okay, 9/11 happens, but let's pretend that the Taliban actually gave up all these Al-Qaeda operatives that carried out bin Laden and Zawahiri and Saif al-Adil and all these bad guys. They just gave them up to the United States. It's like, pick them up, here they are. We would have never invaded that country. We would have never done any of the stuff we did in Afghanistan, and we would have been spared 20 years of war. And so, because our priority was to get these guys, not to destroy the larger infrastructure, which became the narrative that we've had for the last 20 years, basically my entire adult life. And so as long as things don't get too bad coming out of Afghanistan, if there's these groups are attacking each other and attacking civilians in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the United States is not going to do anything about it. It's only if they decide to attack American interests or the United States itself is when we're going to start getting involved again. I mean, for example, there's a terrible attack on a Shia mosque in Peshawar 3 days ago, killed scores and scores of people. What's the United States going to do about that? And the answer is nothing, because we can't do anything about it, because this is an internal thing. And so as long as if it touches American interest, then we're going to do something about it. But it really has to attack. It really has to affect American interests in a big way for us to get back into that pit of vipers.
A couple more questions. Han asked, and Han, let me see if I can paraphrase this a bit, because we did talk quite a bit about ISI and their interest in picking up Ralph. But what could that have been, Aki, something along the lines of just that he may have been a valuable informant of theirs on other issues? They recognized he could have been dangerous on some other things. Did they see him as perhaps being an informant on Al-Qaeda issues, or what do you think about that? What was the motivation?
It is certainly possible. And that's writing this book, you start asking questions where you know there's no answer. So let me give you a very simple question, which if you unspool it, and it's a very simple one that we all can think about. So Rasheed Ralph escapes Britain. He has a British passport and a Pakistani passport. Gets to Pakistan, and within a couple of years, he's married, right? He's, how old is he? 23, 24 at the time. You don't just get married in Pakistan. It's a relation, and especially in, maybe your families get together, you have a family understanding, you talk to each other, the families know each other. You don't just show up and get married, especially to the head of a madrasa in Bawalpur. And so how does this guy show up and get married? And now I believe he has 2 children now with his wife. Now, he's deceased, but, and I'm guessing that there was some relationship between his family in the UK and the family of the bride in Pakistan. How they somehow talked to each other, or they exchanged messages with each other through intermediaries. Those things have never been caught or collected by anybody, by an intelligence service. As far as I know, we don't know the relationship, if there is a relationship between the families in Pakistan and the family in the UK, but they are certainly talking to each other somehow, and we just don't really know. And so there are all kinds of wheels within wheels within wheels that we in the West, we who have been in these intelligence agencies, we have zero optic into. I'm talking zero. And these are all secrets and mysteries. So in terms of maybe the Pakistanis would think that Ralph could have been an asset to them. It's possible. But once you start targeting Americans, and this is too big of a topic, even 7/7 was too big of an issue. You don't attack London, and you don't attack the United States and expect the Brits and the Americans not to do anything about it. And so
now you're a liability.
You're a liability. Had you just kept it to like killing Shia in your own country or killing Indian troops in Kashmir, then it's fine. But now, now you've upset the West, and now they're going to bring all this. They're going to really turn the screws on the Pakistani state itself, and it's a cost calculation, in my view.
All right, we have a final question. Alan asked, and I think this is it's a good one for you, Aki, because of your interest in social media intelligence. Is you said that you were able to find the ex-wife on Facebook. Do these how accessible are these connections on Facebook? Do we still see a lot of this type of conspiratorial activity on the social media platforms?
Well, I literally I went on Facebook and I just put in her name, and she shows up, and they said, she lives in this town, her section, her area is called Walthamstow, and said, just Googled or search for Walthamstow and this woman's name, and she pops up, and pictures of her kid pops up, who, by the way, is the spitting image of her father, who's certainly serving 40 years in a maximum security prison in Britain. Listen, people just one of the things I really realized when writing this book is that there are we think of terrorist organizations out there, especially in the West, but they all have family, they have brothers and sisters and mothers and cousins, and they're part of a larger ecosystem who participate in regular life and commerce, and so you can actually find them. They are real people. And who participate on social media. And so if you know what you're looking for, you can certainly find it. So Rasheed Rauf's family, they basically live in Birmingham, and I didn't really touch them. I didn't really interview them at all because his father's incredibly litigious. So I didn't want to get involved in that. But his brother, who was picked up, who had not, by the way, his whole family had nothing to do with this. It was just Rasheed Rauf who was involved in 7/7, 7/21, and OVERT, and a bunch of other plots, by the way, too. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they're on all these things because they're just regular people just living their regular lives. And I want to emphasize that it is really easy to scapegoat whole communities, and I want to make sure that we do not scapegoat people who happen to be from a certain ethnic or racial or religious background. Because, for example, Ali had 7 brothers and sisters. None of them were involved in terrorism. His family's never involved in terrorism. I went through all their court documents. So the British brought in all these people. The defense counsels brought in all these people who speak very highly of the terrorist, individual terrorists. I mean, they're loved sons and sons and cousins, and they help their sisters when they're in trouble. And these are real people with real lives, and most of the people around them who share similar values do not turn to terrorism and they lead perfectly healthy, happy, productive, tax-paying lives in our societies. And so I really want to make sure that we are not scapegoating people for their backgrounds.
And it's all the more mysterious why somebody like Abdul Ahmed Ali, who was pretty normal in almost every measure, would get involved in a plot where he was going to carry out mass murder.
Yeah.
Anyway, listen, thanks very much. This was very compelling and really great presentation. We're really glad to have you with us. Hopefully we can have you back soon. And thanks everybody for their great questions. I hope you really enjoyed what Aki Peritz had to say today about these important events. And please look to join us next week on the 15th, where we will be returning to our look at the war in Ukraine with our colleague, Jack O'Connor, who will talk about geospatial intelligence and how we're looking at the war through that lens. So thanks everybody very much, and we'll see you next week.
All right, thank you so much. And feel free to get in touch with me. You can find my email at American University. So I'd love to continue the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.